Destiny. When you think of this franchise, you probably think one of three things. That game from Bungie, creators of Halo, that came out in 2014, that just wasn't very good at launch.
Who are you?
Why have you been watching us?
I don't even have time to explain why I don't have time to explain.
Or the sequel to that game in 2017 that also wasn't very good at launch, even despite what they learned from the first game.
I promised before that this was the most rewarding public event, and there we have it. We have 2 chests.
Nice.
Or 3, that game that I still play today despite the rough times it's had because there's something there. It's well understood the issues this franchise has had go all the way back to Destiny 1's release date, and today in 2024, we stand on the precipice of the final expansion of this current saga in Destiny. One that technically starts its narrative back all the way in Destiny 1, but only really got going in earnest with the release of the Shadowkeep expansion in 2019. And with the release of this recent free update with Into the Light, the beginning of the end of Destiny is here. Today, we're looking at this free update, Into the Light, and what it has to offer. If you should come back for it, how Final Shape is shaping up, no pun intended, the recent leaks around Destiny 3 being in development, and what the future holds for Bungie and Destiny. Starting with the free update that launched last week, Into the Light serves as a sort of pre-patch to the Final Shape, a concept you'll be familiar with if you've played MMOs like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV. The narrative content here is thin, but it is there. Crow entered the Traveler at the end of the Season of the Wish storyline last season, and currently the Witness fleet of pyramid ships are assaulting Earth, which you can see in the skybox across the 3 different maps you'll play in the new mode. This new mode is called Onslaught, and it's currently the focal point of this update. Onslaught is a wave defense mode, a long-requested game mode for Destiny 2. It essentially operates much like Firefight has for Halo. I've played and beaten this new mode on both normal, round 50, and legend round 50. And currently, you face either Fallen or Hive along with Tormentors within the mode. You build defenses in the form of turrets, decoys, or trip mines, and every 5 waves, you either run the Spark inside a pyramid ship or fight a boss. Brave Arsenal weapons drop throughout the mode via the end of boss round chests, with the potential for what the community is calling shiny weapons, signified by their masterworked, multi-perk columned attributes. These are just plain and simple better, more rare versions of the weapons you can earn within the mode, and they span fan-favorite weapons from the Crucible and raids from throughout Destiny's history. This new mode is a great chance to get some incredible raid and high-end PvP weapons if you're a returning player, don't raid, or missed out on these back when they were available. Additionally, with this update, Bungie is bringing back the Whisper of the Worm and 0-hour exotic missions. These missions were removed back when Bungie was still vaulting content, something we still haven't really recovered from, with many raids, raid layers, and planets still being out of the game to this day. Still, getting these back is a welcome addition as part of this free update. Additionally, with Into the Light, it will also include a new mode called Pantheon, a raid boss gauntlet. This raid boss rush mode is coming with exclusive emblem and weapon rewards later in April. There's a seal to earn as well, which is what I'm mainly interested in. The only part that sucks about Pantheon is it's temporary. I thought Bungie would have learned their lesson when they said they were done vaulting content years ago after the universal negative feedback that this practice has received, but unfortunately that isn't the case. Bungie has been listening to the community and working in a more agile manner, making updates to issues far more hastily as of late than they ever have, so there is hope that enough feedback around them removing this game mode will eventually fall on ears that are willing to make the change to keep it in the game. But as of now, that is Into the Light. It's a free update for anybody who plays the game, which serves as a stopgap to the content drought we were going to have with the delay of Final Shape from its original release in February to June. All in all, as a free update, I think it's good and enjoyable, though not without issues. But as a longtime player of the game, I think for other core players and fans of the game who are already playing, this is certainly enough to keep them engaged until the June release of Final Shape. But what about this expansion? What is the current status of Final Shape, just 2 months prior to launch? Well, last Tuesday, Final Shape had a further gameplay showcase from the one last August. And in this showcase, they detailed some pretty exciting additions that we didn't previously have knowledge of. Not even the Leaks Discord servers had knowledge of some of these additions. The new things shown off last week were, 1, a new subclass called Prismatic, which allows you to mix and match some abilities from existing Light and Darkness subclasses, and with how integral builds have become to Destiny, this sort of further opens up the game to some crazy combinations. Arc Strand Titans as an example, being able to wield both Arc and Strand abilities. Additionally, we're getting a new enemy race, the Dread, which carry over the design themes and motifs of the Tormentor, which was released last year with LightFall. Destiny hasn't offered a new race of enemies to fight since the Scorn were introduced back in 2018's Forsaken. So it's exciting for the sandbox to get a truly new addition of enemies. We obviously got the Tormentor last year and the Light Hive from the previous years, and while the Tormentor is a wholly unique enemy, The Light Hive were essentially just enemy AI guardians, so the addition of the Dread is a truly exciting prospect for how the game might feel a bit more fresh going forward. Additionally, as revealed last fall in the original showcase for the final shape, the new location inside the Traveler called the Pale Heart is coming, with a more linear design than we've previously seen in locations, which I think has a lot to do with the way they want to tell the story of the campaign in this location. We've seen plenty of screenshots of the old tower and some other locations within this place through different trailers and different footage. I suspect we'll see a lot of callback to the original storylines from Destiny 1, and that will sort of tie everything back together before they narratively send us off into the future. As well, there's new supers for the existing light subclasses, and we're getting exotic class items for the new subclass Prismatic, which will serve as a Kanai's Cube variant from Diablo, which will allow you to stack 2 different exotic powers. These exotic class items work specifically with the new Prismatic subclass. I'm expecting some truly broken stuff to be built, and for a ton of items to be disabled for the World First race later this summer. They've already stated that, unlike Strand from last year, there won't be a currency you have to farm in order to buy the different fragments and aspects for the subclass. So, by the end of the campaign, you should have a pretty robust suite of options for the Prismatic builds. Narratively, we know we're fighting the Witness in the raid, and that's something that will occur within the story following the end of the raid, once it's completed and beaten by a team, that will bring about some conclusion to the Light and Darkness saga, and a likely narrative beginning to the episodes that will serve as the replacement for seasons going into the first year of the final shape and beyond. But outside of the content of the game, what happens to Bungie if the final shape is good, bad, or somewhere in between? If it meets expectations, or if they fall short? Well, if it's bad, I think Bungie as we know it is going to look dramatically different. Bungie will have lost a lot of cachet and goodwill, even more than they have already with how LightFall has turned out in the missteps of the past. This will certainly mean they've missed their revenue targets, and that current leadership would be relieved. Sony's claws around Bungie's performance would kick in, and they would form a board to oversee Bungie and make decisions from there on out. Given that Bungie's only made money with Destiny for the past decade, I would expect that Sony has them continue to work on Destiny 2, while incubating their extraction shooter Marathon and anything else. There's a lot of talk about developers at Bungie waiting out their vesting schedules from the acquisition from Sony back from 2021, which seems likely if they aren't able to deliver on the final shape and morale at the studio continues to deteriorate. The second scenario is a similar one to the first. The final shape isn't bad, but it's not great, and isn't what fans or developers hope was delivered. They likely would still miss their revenue targets, albeit by a smaller margin, and Sony would still assume control of Bungie. Developers would likely still leave following their vesting cliff endings, and Destiny and Marathon would still continue, but in what forms following the episodes is unclear. And finally, there exists a possible scenario for Bungie in which they turn it around. The final shape is received well, it sells well, recurring revenues from player spending via the episodes and microtransactions come in, and they stave off Sony's takeover of the current leadership of Bungie, following a hit of revenue targets. Now, you could argue which would be better, to be ruled over by the current leadership who doesn't seem to listen to their developers, or by Sony who doesn't know Bungie nearly as well, but might be more receptive. It's a toss-up really, but one thing we know for sure is that throughout all these scenarios, Destiny is going to continue. Luke Smith says as much at the beginning of the Final Shape gameplay showcase last Tuesday.
It's a journey that'll end inside the Traveler, with you facing the Witness. But facing the Witness is not the end of Destiny 2, and it's definitely not the end of Destiny. After you face the Witness, we're going to tell you what's coming next to Destiny 2 and beyond. We'll see you soon.
But how will Destiny continue? I don't think it's unfair to say that seasons have become quite samey and felt very repetitive in the way that they dole out content. It remains to be seen just how well episodes will translate what seasons have been doing, but make them more engaging and less formulaic. But what about the next major release in the franchise? Is Bungie just going to continue to make expansions, or are we going to get something like a Destiny 3? For a while there's been hope that Bungie might course correct from just making Destiny 2 content, and start fresh with a new game. A chance for them to get it right at launch, and for new players who find Destiny at current impenetrable to jump on board and play a game that can actually be narratively and progression-wise at the same starting place as everybody else. And recent leaks seem to suggest we may be getting Destiny 3. Now it's important to take these with a grain of salt, but the comments made by this leaker in particular on Reddit, who did leak the Prismatic subclasses well in advance of them being revealed last Tuesday, something not even the leaks Discord servers had been talking about, does lead me to believe that these are credible. It's not as if this person just said, there is a new subclass coming. They called it by name. They speak to the details of it, information you'd only have if you were connected to a source at Bungie. The codename for this Destiny 3 project is Payback, the codename being a sort of meta commentary on Bungie getting payback against their past selves for under-delivering on the first 2 entries of Destiny at launch. As I mentioned in the beginning, Destiny's issues are pretty well documented at this point. Destiny 1 launched in a very poor state and only really got good with the Taken King. And by the end of Rise of Iron, the game was in a place I think most people would consider pretty complete as far as robust systems and activities to enjoy. But then, in 2017, they threw it all away. Not intentionally, but I think their structure was set up in such a way that could implement all the different positive changes they've made to the previous game. Rise of Iron was made with a live team at Bungie, not the team currently building the next iteration of the game. And while I'm sure these two teams talk to each other, it's not possible that the team building Rise of Iron and all these different features could have translated these all over to the team making the next sequel, and to get them implemented in a way that felt seamless. Now, should they have done this? Of course. I don't think anybody can argue that the developers should learn from their first game while making their second, but this is one of the pitfalls of making a live service game across two different teams. I think for Bungie, Destiny 3 is the logical next step and what has to happen in order to get new players back on board. At least from my perspective as a longtime player who's done all the raids, all the dungeons, I've solo flawlessed 5 out of the 8 dungeons, I would welcome a completely fresh start for the game, albeit with some titles and transmogs carrying over, if it meant Bungie could make an entirely new experience for both returning players and new ones, that could serve as a reset point for whatever the next saga of Destiny is going to be. Now, whether or not this gets made is hard to really pin down, and the future for Bungie is a bit uncertain. Bungie is potentially going to be under new management should their fiscal targets remain unfulfilled by the end of the year. Even still, the only path forward for Bungie is Marathon being a mega hit outside of Destiny, and the other smaller projects incubating at Bungie that I doubt are as far along as Marathon is. And in my gut, I don't believe Marathon's going to be that mega hit. The only path forward to me seems to be Destiny 3, where it can be the game everybody wanted Destiny 1 and 2 to be at launch, and a good jumping on point for the millions of people who fell off from Destiny or for whatever reason, whether it was poor content, content droughts, or complex, incohesive in-game narratives or otherwise. The next 2 to 4 months are going to be exciting as a fan of the game and the industry because the fate of a storied and revered studio like Bungie is going to be written in a very profound way, whether it's Bungie redeeming itself in the eyes of its parent company fiscally, and in the eyes of fans in delivering on the final shape and its episodic content thereafter. And I think the failure or success of both go hand in hand. And should Bungie fail, they will otherwise undergo a radical transformation into something completely unrecognizable to what they've been in the past. I'm hopeful, whether it's full-blown copium or not, that Bungie will deliver on the final shape. What I saw last week gave me a lot more confidence than I previously had. I think it's interesting that they held something like a new race and new subclass so close to the chest for this long. I think it might have done a bit more in helping retain players from the last 6 months if they knew that something that integral to the way the game plays is coming. Still, I have less confidence about the episodes that will follow it, and that while the episodes won't be nearly as engaging and will likely be the same seasonal content we've been getting with just 3 themes in the year instead of 4, that one way or another they can retreat back into the shadows and deliver on a Destiny 3 in the future, and get it right the first time. So many things can go wrong between now and that possible future, not least of which how many developers who have made the memorable raids and dungeons and art surrounding Destiny will even still remain at the company any longer than they have to once their vesting ends. The final shape has to be successful both commercially and in the eyes of players, who I think at this point are owed a satisfying conclusion to what has been a 10-year saga, even with its missteps along the way. Bungie has to keep Destiny 2 going as a live service game and satiate core fans while also potentially building out their next projects, which likely does include now a Destiny 3, and even then, that game has to deliver on what Bungie has failed to deliver with Destiny 1 and 2, a well fleshed out, thorough, cohesive game with a great narrative, engaging systems, and a satisfying endgame for players at launch, and not something that has to be completed and fixed over time following its release, and asks of players to stick with it despite the issues. We've seen plenty of games come back from the brink. Destiny 1 is one of the prime examples, and so is Destiny 2, but games like Siege and the original Division or other live service games that had rough launches and came back. But I think with how many great games are coming out every year, and how many games continue to be great, the likelihood that games will falter at launch and then somehow make a return later on is less and less likely. Games are expensive to make, and they're expensive to maintain. And that's doubly so for games like live service games. We've seen how games like the Suicide Squad are very obviously going to end following the release of their committed content. If Bungie is to get a third chance at getting this franchise right at launch, I don't think they can deliver anything less than greatness if they're going to continue to have the respect and the player numbers to go with it. I'm hopeful that the final shape will be the first step in this path forward, but it still remains to be seen. And I think in just under 2 months when the game's finally out and players have beaten the raid, we'll have a better idea of where the game's going narratively and just what the future holds for Bungie. That's going to do it for me, guys. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.